Thank you all for attending. And in a moment, I will ask you all to introduce yourselves because we've got new faces around the room. They won't know necessarily each other. Thank you for sparing the time to come along today. We've got a fairly crammed agenda, which I'm going to make some sort of decisions which Scott doesn't know about on the way through, but I'm sure he'll keep me in mind on the other side. Firstly, just to get the priorities sorted out, I have to thank Hugh for being the biscuit monitor today and providing the biscuits. There's a wide range of provender around the table, so please help yourselves, and thank you, Hugh, for doing that. Otherwise, let's make a start. So I'm the chair of the committee, and have we got any members of the public? Thank you, Andrew. Okay, well, I'm going to choose this point, which is not the right point, but perhaps I'll go through the chair's schedule. The agenda papers have been published on the council's website. I request that members and officers refer to the page numbers from the agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. We'll be running today in a hybrid format with key officers physically present in County Hall. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on some of the agenda items. Observe. Council will be making an audio recording of the meeting, which I presume has already started. Please only speak at the chair's invitation. Switch on the microphone on the desk, and I'll probably be the worst offender with that. Say your name before speaking and turn off after speaking. For those joining via MS Teams, turn off your microphones and cameras, please. Use the meeting chat function and highlight the facility in MS Tenders to turn on live captions. So, firstly, then, I'll take apologies for absence. Who has those?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think all members of the committee are present with the exception of Mr. Horton and Mr. Hooper. Other members of the committee are in the room.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, let's take the opportunity now of introducing ourselves. I'll start perhaps with Alan on the far end and work round clockwise.
Thank you, Chair. Alan Hemsley, co-opted member, living in Carhampton.
David Strip, co-opted member as well, from Kingston St Mary.
So Brian Smedley, member for Bridgewater South and Bridgewater Town Council member.
Francis Nicholson, member for Dalton.
Hello everyone, I'm David Clark. I'm the new Service Director for Democratic Governance and Legal Services at Somerset Council.
Scott Waldridge, Head of Governance and Democratic Services.
Good morning, Andrew Melchiorish, Service Manager in Democratic Services.
Morning, everyone. Neil Milne, Governance Specialist in the Democratic Services team.
Martin Jimmery, I think I'm yes, that's right, Councillor for Frome West.
Thank you. Hugh Davis, representing Willerton, Watchet, Sanford Brett, and all the way to Guernsey. I'm one of two councillors covering that area. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Steve Hallard. I'm solicitor and deputy monitoring officer.
And good morning, everybody. I'm Leslie Dolan. I'm the principal lawyer and deputy monitoring officer at Shepton Mallet.
Good. Thank you all. So we'll get to know each other much more better. Lee, you didn't get a chance to introduce yourself. Go on, star of the show.
Good morning, I'm Lee Wilman. I work at Somerset Council and I'll be providing committee support today.
Thank you, Lee. Absolutely crucial. Okay, so let's move on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, so we'll move briskly on to public question time. Nobody's put a question in any other form. Okay, right, let's clear on. To the minutes of the previous meeting, item 4 in the agenda. Now, I have to own up for myself that although I wasn't at that meeting, I was in New Zealand at the time, was remotely with it, and I haven't had a chance to read the minutes at all. I've been flat out since they arrived on the computer, so apologies for that. So I will leave others to pick up any issues, and I wasn't able to get a copy because of computer problems to my machine either. Perhaps I'll just go, I haven't even got a copy to go through. So have I got one? Okay, thank you very much. Let me go through them. I'll go through the items as they're numbered on the left-hand side. And thank you to Brian for standing as chair for that meeting. That's very kind of you, Brian. Thank you very much. Declaration of Parliament. The salient items. 31. That was all covered. I think I'm going to speed up and go through by page. Page 4. Is there any issues or comments that people want to raise on that page? Page 5. Again, the same question. And the final page, 6. I think everything that's is on the agenda anyway to be covered. It's not already covered. So we accept those minutes. Thank you. Anybody second? Somebody second? I'll second them. Thank you, Martin. Okay, moving on to the officer support for the Standards Committee. And firstly, may I say that there's been quite a lot of change, you might imagine, that's gone on over the last month, over the last 10 months, and probably even before that. So personally, I'd like to thank, on behalf of this committee, the work done by Claire, who is no longer with the committee, with Scott, right on my right here, Andrew, and the support they've given and help throughout the process, which was quite a moving target on many occasions. And I think sometimes we just basically took a bead on where we thought it was and had a go at it, which was you know, I was greatly supported by the people I've just mentioned. There are 2 others, I think. Remind me if I've missed anybody, which is Tom Woodhams, I've thanked Tom and Claire by email on behalf of the committee. Tom, who's gone to Oxford, so won't be with us, and I'll ask Scott or David to clarify who will be replacing them, so we know who to go to. And also I've spoken to Melanie, who has gone to East Devon, to pastures new in both cases. So I wish them the best with their new roles and thank them for all the efforts they've put in over the past 10 months, it'll be, I suppose. So that, have I missed anybody out? Okay, I don't think so. Please, you're going to be staying with us, Lee, are you? Hopefully. So I don't thank you as a termination situation. Okay. Perhaps then I could ask Scott or David to clarify who the replacement contacts will be, and you've had some information about that, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm, I suppose, in terms of the committee support, Democratic Services, again, just so members are aware, we have, following vesting day, put in place what are known as interim arrangements, pending the finalisation of a permanent structure for Democratic Services. So as part of that, we've taken the opportunity to look at skills and experience across the team that now exists. And as part of that, we have allocated, certainly on an interim basis, both Neil Milne, but also Steve Taylor in particular. So Steve Taylor for Standards Committee.
Does Neil, what is the role that Neil replaces or will cover?
So Neil's here principally in terms of just that advisor type support, but mainly the principal support is intended to be Steve Taylor.
Okay, so
for the committee. I think the additional element then, and it's probably better for David to confirm then, is the both legal advice support that the committee may draw upon, but also the monitoring officer support that the committee is also used to receiving.
I'll come back to David in a moment. Would it be easy to, in terms of, to say that Neil is now you and Steve is Andrew?
No, it wouldn't. Sorry. No,
Okay.
no. It would be easy to say that Steve is taking on what was formerly a combination of both Andrew's and Claire's role
Okay, just so
in
that,
terms of the primary support for the committee, which is the administrative and officer support for agendas, minutes, and publication of reports.
okay, so what should members go to Neil for?
I would suggest in terms of queries about meetings, dates, agendas, meeting invites, minutes, that members should go to Steve Taylor.
To Neil.
Sorry, Neil is primarily just here just as an interim, as in for this meeting, because Steve was unavailable.
Okay, so everything goes to Steve.
Yes,
Who is the Claire role?
that's Steve as well, Chair.
Okay, right. Steve's desk, basically. Yes, okay, we'll pass back to you for clarification on the legal PMO side of support.
I can come in there, Chair. So the position of MO remains with Scott for the time being until it's anticipated there's a full council decision at the May full council, where it's anticipated it will transfer to myself, subject to full council making that decision. However, I think it's important for members to be aware of the difference in scale now with the new authority, and especially having now inheriting the responsibility for all the parish, city and town councillors in terms of the standards regime. So as an interim measure, I've asked Scott to appoint a number of deputy monitoring officers, and we've got that includes myself for the time being, but also got another two in terms of Steve Hellard and Leslie Dolan here with the committee as well, just to make those introductions. And we've also got Honor Clark remains as a deputy monitoring officer for the time being as well. Once the structure's in place and following full council, we'll get some confirmation for the committee as to the sort of permanent arrangements in that regard.
I'm going to keep a running action plan as we go along, and I'm going to suggest an action here, which is just to, perhaps you could just clarify that in the email situation and send that to everybody who's here, and then we're not contacting the wrong officers. Is that down to you, Scott, to do to Neil?
Sorry, Chair. I think that's probably for David to confirm.
Yeah, okay. I'll take a photograph of this at the end so you can have a copy of it, but I've very kindly, Alan has offered to type it up so that we're not waiting for the minutes to know what we'll agree to crack on with. Okay, thanks for that clarification. Let's move on to next item, which is an update on the priority groups. For those who weren't here at the time, we decided there were three priorities, P1, P2, P3. We're very creative about the names. And they were divided into groups. And the groups were myself on P1 with Brian, Norman, David and Paul. Paul is not here today. P2 was chaired by Norman with Robin and Alan. And now I'm presuming, Francis, that you will, you're replacing Norman. So you'll be.
I've been appointed to the committee, so.
Would you like to take over the?
Really helpful. I don't know what people.
Right. Okay. Let me come back to that, and I'll just clarify who's on the other one, which is the chair is Martin on P3, and Alan and Hugh. Yeah, very succinctly, if you like, I can be succinct. The P1, we're looking at the complaints process and its adoption, the code of conduct, and there's been something I'll mention in a moment we need to clarify as we go through these things. And code of conduct, yeah. It's sort of like, it has been widening, not widening, broadening, I would say, in terms of the amount of stuff. And I'll mention this when I come on to P1 in a moment. P2 looked at a discussion of how we'd actually get that code of conduct adopted by the 292 parish councils around the area. And that was work that Alan's particularly been involved in. And P3 was the discussion of the officer code of conduct. And what I want to say here now is that today, I want to make sure we're completely clear about what our role as Standards Committee is in the process, because there have been up to 3 bodies involved, the old authority, the LGR, and the new bodies. And sometimes for myself, and probably it was only me, I've been unclear as to about what our role is in this. So I think 1, we need to be clear about our role. 2, what our authority is, whether we're the lead on a particular document or just a consultee, what happens to the comments that we make, and what is the timescale that we need to be working to actually get these for full council to adopt. And so I'm going to try and make sure as we go through today that happens in each of the P1. I hope I've reflected on the comments that people have made to me in that area. Okay, so P1 is, and I'm assuming you've got the documents. What I'm going to have to say again is that this arrived late to me. Actually, I think we've got. Oh no, that's all right. Sorry. And I did print it off actually. Sure that my computer would stay alive long enough for me to read it. The front of the document is something that I'd not seen before at all, and so I haven't had a chance to actually go through that in detail and commented on it. So, well, this is the next stage I was going to go on to, because
You've got a document there. Is that?
Yeah, I've just printed.
Right, okay.
Yeah. I've just printed it off because I've had problems with my IT. And so what I was going to suggest for discussion is that the first part of the document, what we have seen, Francis, already is the how to complain document, which is at the rear of that, and also the media plan. And there's been substantial consultation by email around this group. And I'm sorry that you may not have been involved in that because I didn't know you were coming till today. But I'm going to come on to that at the end, and then just hopefully it's for adoption, apart from a couple of questions I want to clarify. So please shout up as you have been if when things are not clear. So my proposal is that the first document, which is the investigation, I think it's called, let me just read this, start, and it is pages 13 to 52, I think. I personally have not had a chance to make informed comments on that. And I was going to ask what, therefore, is the timescale and our authority. Scott's looking at me in terms of.
Yeah, I just wondered if it'd be helpful just to put some context, particularly for perhaps new members of the commission.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Just to help everyone, I mean, agenda item 6, what agenda item 6 is doing is the priority groups that the chair's reference, we're looking at the potential for the committee to recommend new procedures and approaches for the new council. So all of the documents that are circulated are effectively draft documents. They're not existing, they are draft. So the very first one, paper 1, represents the work that's been done through the LGR governance work stream, which is looking at the complaints procedures that were operated by the previous 5 councils and seeking to develop almost a composite best practice. The reason why I reference draft is because currently the complaints process is the one that was previously operated by Somerset County Council, and until such time as that is changed, that is the complaints process. So paper 1 shows the work to date in developing a potential new complaints process, but it is only draft. Paper 2, similarly, are potential new guidance notes. I have to emphasise new because there are existing guidance notes and complaints form that were carried over from the county council. So again, until they are changed, they are the actual ones. So what you have in papers 1 through to, I believe, paper 5 from memory, 4, are draft documents, the result of work by both officers and members of this committee, looking at best practice examples of other councils and seeking to develop, investigate new procedures, new guidance notes, a visual flow chart, and a protocol for how the council would deal with media inquiries about standards matters. So those are all purely draft. The final one, which talks about the hearings panel, that's actually, again, that's part of the constitution. So that's telling and sharing with members, these are the terms of reference for what the council's already agreed. So I think papers 1 to 4 are more about bringing together for the benefit of the committee post-vesting day. This is the culmination of work over the past 10 months, looking at potential new procedures rather than these are the new procedures. They're really to help bring forward to say, as a sort of current position on the development of that work, in order for the committee then to give some views and direction on where it would like to see that work go forward for the new council. But until such time as that direction's given, then the existing complaints process and the existing complaints guidance notes are still in force and are still published on the new council's website.
Thank you, Scott. Does that clarify the situation for everybody? I've got a couple of questions, which perhaps I'll just start off with, if you don't mind. First is that the documents haven't got paper 1 or 4, but it'd be useful to have those on the top so we know which ones we're talking about. And I think what we can do, what would you like to put this whole package forward to full council, 1 block? Sorry.
Again, the pure reason that they're here today is mainly as an update for the committee on the work of the priority groups. I think it's then for the committee to take a view on whether the committee feels they are in a final form, whether the committee feels they need further work, and if so, some direction over what areas of further work are required. And
somebody agreed.
I didn't understand that.
It's the talking pocket.
And I think thirdly, obviously, for the for the monitoring officer, because again, it's probably useful to highlight that the complaints procedure, the guidance notes, are generally the responsibility of the monitoring officer statutorily. So the traditional form and what we've been doing for the past 10 months is about that joint work between the monitoring officer and the committee about what form the committee would like the new arrangements to take, and for the monitoring officer to consider those. So in many ways, a lot of the documents, certainly document 1, which is the complaints procedure, guidance notes, document 2, the visual flow chart, document 3, the media protocol, document 4, are generally under the remit of the monitoring officer. But clearly you appreciate that the monitoring officer has been working with the committee in terms of wanting to have in place a procedure that the committee would support. So that's why there's been this joint work over the past 10 months. So at this stage, I wouldn't I suppose my own advice at this point, I wouldn't suggest that this is recommended to full council. I would suggest at this stage it is more about the committee taking a view over whether those proposals are going in the direction that the committee would like to see, and if so, whether they are in final form or whether further work's required, what further work there is. And then thirdly, about then agreeing an approach with the monitoring officer about when the committee and the monitoring officer would like to see those new arrangements in place.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, just perhaps to give some structure to it, I'm going to make a proposal that, because some of these documents we've seen more of than others. So I'm going to propose, and I would suggest perhaps starting from the other end, if we aimed for first full council that's after the summer break, I haven't got the date in my head, would that be realistic for us to work to? Can anyone remember the date?
And again, Chair, just to flag that there's no requirement for these documents to go to full council.
There isn't.
No.
Okay.
It's this committee in conjunction with the monitoring officer. That doesn't mean that the committee couldn't make a recommendation. I'm just saying that generally the full council has delegated these matters to the monitoring officer in working with the standards committee.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, well, can I suggest that we take the standards committee meeting after the break in the summer as the final sort of point where we feel we're comfortable with these? That's a suggestion, proposal rather. Would anybody like to second that or change it? It's obviously arbitrary. David.
It just seems that a lot of work has been done on this and we're sort of pretty well there. I know there's some comments from Alan on the latest document that came through, and that probably, do we need to wait that long, or should we wait with this interim? How long do we envisage the interim period going through? Is it better to wait until sort of, the final, hopefully you will be the MO going forward? Should we wait until the interim period ceases, and everything is clarified about positions going forward before that?
I'll get Scott to answer.
Again, Chair, the interim work allocations or the structure of the service has, I'd suggest, no relationship with the committee's determination or views on those documents. That's how we structure a service in order to deliver service on behalf of the council. This is much more driven by the council's constitution, and the council's constitution was agreed on the 22nd of February. So we already have a constitution. I think we already have a complaints process, and we already have complaints guidance notes. They are not, though, the documents that you've got in front of you. That's because the committee through the priority group has done a piece of work looking at whether there could be a better form of procedure and a better form of guidance notes. So I think in terms of, is there a determinant in terms of a milestone? No, there isn't. So the determinant is purely down to the committee and the monitoring officer in terms of, should the existing process and guidance notes be changed, and if so, when do they need to be changed by? Clearly, in terms of from a pure legal perspective, the existing procedure and the existing guidance notes meet all of our legal requirements. So we are operating safely. We've been operating previously in the form of the County Council safely for many years with those procedures and guidance notes. So there's no legal imperative to change it. It's more about, again, I suppose the desire and expectations of the committee to try and take forward some of those improvements, and then working with the monitoring officer, agreeing how realistic is a timescale for achieving that.
I was just thinking, if the complaints document, the how to complaint documents is, reflects the way that we're going to go forward now, because that has been in the, you know, it's been being reviewed for some time now. I think we're pretty confident that that stands up. Is it not better to be, if the new document encompasses and incorporates sort of best practice that wasn't there before, should we not be just signing that off? Or is that dependent on all the other supporting documents that sit behind it?
Thank you, David. Yeah, what I was going to suggest, and I've probably chosen the wrong way to go about it, was that we have had long discussions about this document, how to complain, about the media plan, and about your schematic to describe what's going on. And we'd got to the point, apart from a couple of questions which might want to pick up, where basically I was hoping we'd agree that they were done and dusted. I don't know what's in the other document starting at page 13 because I haven't read it yet. So that aside, I was just going to suggest we pick up any questions on those three documents, which I'll just call the media plan, schematic, and the, how to complain. Scott.
Just to clarify, in terms of an order, if you're going to change any documents, paper one, which is the process, needs to be agreed first. The guidance notes, the flow chart, flow from that. You shouldn't, forgive me, but I'd recommend you do not change guidance notes without reviewing the procedure first, because the procedure is the one that currently exists, and the guidance notes you have in paper two do not reflect the current agreed procedure.
Thank you, Scott. Okay. Well, perhaps that aside, let's work on the basis of where we are at the moment, and then we'll go back to it. But are there any other issues that people have got? This P1 group with Tom and Melanie taken this forward and circulated it round. We're happy with it. I think, well, I'll just pick up from David particularly. The two areas that you were keen on was, did it cover vexatious? And we still have to work out how we test drive, but that aside, is everybody happy that we say we've finished the work at the moment on that document, and we therefore come back to it when we've read the guidelines, the bigger document starting at page 13.
Sorry, on the schematic, you know, I appreciate we're trying to put onto one page what is contained in 3 or 4 documents. The one area that there was some discussion with Tom about was about publication of the decision, the outcomes. And Tom suggested wording to the effect that publication of the decision and outcomes will be in accordance with the media protocol. Whereas previously, the schematic, you know, the complaints procedure said the decision and outcomes are confirmed to the subject member and published. So my thought is that if that is something that is sort of a simple overview that is going to the public, you know, saying that it will be in accordance with the media protocols, facts of sort of, what's the word? It's not very clear, is it? You know, it's very vague. Where, you know, you can't, there's not to put all the different options. But so is there a few, and I think this was one of the issues that first came to light around the process, that there didn't, you know, it's very unclear whether decisions should be published or not. And with regard to that, we looked at the processes, procedures of other councils. So is there, does that need further clarification?
Scott wants to come back, I think.
Again, Chair, this is why I recommend that the fundamental point for review is the complaints procedure. It'll be the complaints procedure that will also clarify what happens in terms of the determinations, whether they are published. The current complaints procedure clarifies that we do not currently publish those. We only confirm back to the subject member and to the complainant. They're not published on the website as in findings. So if there is a change as part of a procedure, that need to be picked up in the procedure first. So the reason why you've had that comment back is because it's referenced in the media protocol almost as a holding position, because the media protocol would currently say we don't publish. Again, the views of the committee, we've talked about this before as a committee, is for the new council we need to reach a view over the publication of standards determinations. But at the moment, until that has been finalised and until that view's been reached, the current policy which has been carried over carries on, which is that we do not publish details of complaints on the council's website. I know the committee has a number of views about that, and we've looked at other council examples, particularly on the basis of transparency. But until that policy is changed, that's why that schematic would continue to say as per.
But is that not something fairly fundamental to the procedure? Isn't it not quite a major point, actually, I would say? And until that's resolved, and is that is that change down to this committee, or is that something that has to be agreed by full council?
Again, Chair, because it relates to the complaints procedure, that's a combination of both work of this committee, but in conjunction with the monitoring officer. The complaints procedure is put in place by the monitoring officer as part of their statutory functions. Clearly, the monitoring officer can be advised, guided by the committee. And it would be unusual for a monitoring officer to do something completely against the wishes of a committee, but nevertheless, in terms of that split of responsibilities, that's generally how that works. So that's where, over the past 10 months, we've been working towards developing what do we see as the arrangements for the new council. So all of these documents are just basically bringing us to a point of this is where we've got to in the past 10 months. But the fundamental position is the committee, together with the monitoring officer, over the coming months, need to reach a determination on what is the complaints procedure that the new Somerset Council will be operating, and what's its position in terms of publication of complaints, and what's its position in terms of media inquiries, and what are the guidance that it provides to complainants.
So is that not something fairly important that we need to agree, not at this meeting, but very soon before this is released? Is it not better to nail that point before we release any documents?
My own view is yes. And I think just listening to what we've been talking about, getting a fair grasp on it, are there any other documents that are going to come along which are germane to this particular? Don't know of at this stage.
No, Chair, I mean, all of those effectively bring together the work of the LGR governance workstream and the work of the priority group into one common area. That's been the piece about just all of those parallel pieces of work coming together. So that's all of what those documents are seeking to do. The only thing I would highlight is obviously for information, I think it's paper 5, which is the hearing panel terms of reference. That's part of the constitution. So that is not a draft. That's an agreed version of should the committee be required to establish a hearing panel subcommittee in respect of reviewing an investigation and making a determination. That's just providing that context for the role of the committee in individual investigations. So that, again, that's mainly here for information purposes. Should the committee have views about those terms of reference, then that definitely would need to be recommended to full council because that's part of the constitution.
Okay, I'm going to suggest a proposal, if that's not a combination of two words that mean the same thing. Taking back what I said earlier on, I'm going to propose that P1, which has been working on the whole complaints area, continues to do that, and to picks up all of these documents that are in agenda item 6 and looks at them as a whole. In other words, revisits the work that we've already done in the how to complain, the media plan and the schematic, and accepts any contributions from other members at the same time, but they lead on that as they've been doing. What I'd like to suggest is that we do this over the period before our next meeting, probably over the next month, and come back to that meeting with the document that we've effectively all had a chance to look at and agreed, and we'll just pick up any final issues at the meeting that we have June? No, July probably. 28th of June. That's a proposal. David, you've got a query?
Sorry, can I just take views of people right here, right now, about the whole public, publicising results? Are there views around the committee now about whether or not it's the right thing to do? Is that appropriate?
Yes, you can, David. I'll give you my views. Yes, we should be publicising it. It should be seen to be open. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors about the whole area, and we should be clear to both the public we serve, the complainant, sure all the terms are for the people who are involved in the process, how it will pan out. And I've got different views about who that include, but I personally, and I'll go around the room and ask for other people's views, feel that we should be publicising. Frankly, it was where I started, my understanding started in our first meeting back in June. And I think Scott as well, it was an area that we were missing. So perhaps David would like to get a Vox poll.
I would agree with you, Chairman. I think we should publish. I've made in my comments that some of the procedure says that we should, with the hearing subcommittee should withdraw to consider. Yeah, we're supposed to be open in public. And I appreciate that a jury would retire, but if we're going to be open and transparent, we do everything open and transparent, unless there are specific requirements under the Public Bodies Admissions to Meetings Act, whatever one it is, to have something confidential.
Right.
Don't have a problem with that position, unless the monitoring officer wants to add something that we're not considering it.
When everybody's made their comments. Sure. And then you can sort of.
I think this question has just changed from what was originally asked. There was one about the publication of the judgments and then it then morphed into we should be considering the verdict or whatever you call it when it's not a court, because it's not. In whether how your considerations should be in public. Those are two quite separate questions. I would be very worried about producing a snap judgment, certainly on the second of those. On the first of those, in principle, I favour transparency. However, this is my first meeting. I'm very new. It's taken me until partway through the meeting to realise that my problem with understanding was the table of contents, which didn't have a paper one at all on it, or say that it was priority one that we were looking at. But never mind, I've got that far now. But I don't think I ought at the moment to say anything other than that in principle I favour transparency, because I need to think a deal harder.
Thank you, Francis. Shall I come back to the officers at the end, perhaps, and move on to Martin?
I would like to hear the monitoring officer's view, please.
Scott, you've been put back in the picture.
Again, you'll forgive me because, I will always advise before you've actually got a matter for decision before you, I would counsel against expressing very clear views in terms of decision. You could place yourself at risk of a committee of predetermination by effectively already indicating exactly how you intend to vote before you've actually got the proposal in for you to fully consider. I think as Councillor Nicholson's highlighting there, as yet, she perhaps needs the benefit of the full evidence and picture in order to make an informed decision before indicating her view. So I would, again, I've just counsel against the committee in public indicating a particular view when you don't actually have before you the procedure that we're talking about for decision. All you have before you is the culmination of pieces of work that are in draft form without recommendations for the committee to consider, which includes recommendations from the monitoring officer advising you. Going back to the point about, and Councillor Nicholson pointed to, there are perhaps two questions raised. Yes, there are, because the point that was raised was around the views of the committee regarding the publication of standards determinations by the monitoring officer. The second point, which Mr. Hemsley highlighted around hearing panels, was making reference to the procedures whereby when a hearing panel is convened, whilst the committee panel itself meets in public, in common with other similar bodies, such as our appeals committees and other arrangements which relate to individuals, within that meeting, there is generally, very early on, when you get onto the matter of the complaint itself, a recommendation for the committee or panel to move into private session, because it's going to be discussing details around individuals. And in some of those individuals, particularly where it relates to complaints, are not either councillors or employees of this council. They are members of the public. And therefore, in those circumstances, there are exemptions under law relating to the treatment of those types of individual information. So we would not generally, in those types of meetings, hold the detailed examination of witness statements in public session. They would be done in private session. So that's one of the distinctions over, particularly that reference in the hearing panel to moving to private. And the only point around determination is when you've completed the investigation, whether that's by the monitoring officer or whether that's following a hearing panel subcommittee meeting and it making a determination following the investigation, reviewing the evidence, listening to evidence examples, and then making a decision. That's the point which I think we fundamentally started talking about, which was what is the view of the committee regarding the publication of those determinations? Because the current policy is that monitoring officer determinations are not published on the website. They are only communicated to the complainant and the subject member. Some other councils have policies whereby they produce their decision notices and they publish them on their websites. The current policy of this council is that that is not the case.
David first and Alan.
Yeah, sorry, if I just coming back on Scott's first point. I think the reason I asked the question is not to just to get for the working group to get a view of what the general consensus was, rather than get an agreement at this point. So that's fine.
Alan?
Thank you, Chair. As far as the determination notice is concerned, I was asked for a preference today. No decisions made today. As far as the hearings are concerned, that was a comment I made, and I'm open to being persuaded one way or the other. No decisions has been made in my mind.
Nor in mine. I proposed an individual viewpoint.
I'm always reluctant to go against the monitoring officer's advice until I've seen these issues in practice.
Thank you, Martin. Hugh?
Thank you, Chair. It's very strange that Martin should use those quotes there, because I'm of the same mind. I think the monitoring officer should be just a guide to us as a committee, and we, the committee, should decide whether we want it published. But though we're having legal advice, we've got a whole row of legal people here today. They may differ. So I'm always aware that only one person overtakes what we decide in this type of situation we're in with our standards. If it was in a court of law, the juries decide guilty or not guilty, and the judge puts it over. So that's the way I think we should act as well. I don't think the monitoring officer should have the power over whether we do or we don't. That's how I look at it, Chair.
Thank you, Hugh. Yeah, I wasn't seeking to make a decision at this point in time. It was irreparable and wasn't part of the discussion process. David asked if we could take a view on what the general consensus was, and that's all we've done so far, effectively. So I would like to make a proposal then that P1 continues to hold these documents, including the ones that we've already looked at. And before I saw the first document, I've just clarified with Scott, there aren't any other documents that are going to come out later on when we think we've finished the job. This is it, and we look at them in the context of all of the documents now we have in front of us. The P1 does that, brings that back in email form to the rest of the committee. So we're in a position really at our next meeting to actually move this forward in conjunction with the MO Scott in terms of doing that. That's a proposal. Scott would like to.
Again, sorry, Chair, forgive, just for clarification, you won't be with myself at your next meeting. I won't be the monitoring officer at your next meeting. Just for clarification, that should be David.
Yes, I just. Switch my thing on again. Well, I'd like to sort of get some consensus, Francis, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, the proposal is effectively that we review the document and come back with a final decision later on.
Yes, we go back to P1 with the full document now that we've seen, and we come back at the next meeting. We come back before that.
I will propose that.
Seconded?
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody else is disagreeing that? Okay. Raised the issue about, sorry, about the microphone, about what they were, just so we're clear, could we have a document that says this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're not, it's not in our remit. Hopefully, paraphrasing what you said. So we're going to review docs 1 to 4. Circulate as we've been doing in the past to Science Committee for agreement, adoption, ratification at our next meeting. Is that timescale achievable? End of June, I think it was.
28th of June is your next meeting, Chair, yes.
Is that a fair reflection of where we are? Nobody's either nodding or shaking their. Okay, thank you very much. When I put the 28th of June up there, that doesn't have to be the final date. We could have finished it a month or before that or whatever, depending on requirements. I think P1 will set out that clearly in their mind, and we'll get together and have a meet to decide when we're meeting about this. Any other contributions that people want to make on? There was one more thing I was going to say. Alan Helmsley found the time somewhere to send a document around commenting on the first part, the draft Code of Conduct Investigation and Hearing Procedure. And I suggest we use Alan's good work as a framework to work on, but don't be blinkered by his thoughts. But we can use that as a framework anyway. So everyone should have received that. I know it didn't go out. Some documents haven't gone out. Has everyone received that? Just stick your hands up if you haven't.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, which document?
So the review of the draft.
Yes, yes, sorry.
Alan did. Yeah. Before we move on to P2. Scott, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, just a suggestion, but in order for recommendations to come back to the committee on the 28th of June, I'd probably suggest that those documents need to be completed in final form by the 14th of June, just to help you,
Thank you.
You will need to have a report drafted by the monitoring officer in final form, published on the 20th of June. So it's much earlier than you think.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah. This was chaired by Norman and includes Robin and Alan. Alan is the only one that's here and did circulate on the 5th of April. I don't know what happened to it, a document, but it's subsequently he recirculated it just over the weekend or on Monday. Alan, would you like to just talk us through that, please?
I know Francis has had it this morning. Apologies, I didn't know you were coming, Francis. There are two tabs on this spreadsheet. The first one is full list, which is the, can you put it up on the?
That's best if I pick up on Francis's comment or question.
Yes, I thank you very much, Alan. You sent me a document which I thought was comments on the papers in priority 1. Does it then? I haven't. Right. Okay. It would be really good to have that. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps I ought to say one thing here, that if, as Francis has sadly not been briefed to date, we need to just be aware, and I need to be aware that, you know, there's a lot of things you might not have had.
Mr. Chairman, it would be really helpful, if possible, to have a proper briefing. Because if I'm to be in any way useful to this committee, let alone your original suggestion of chairing the P2 group, which would be fine, I need to know what I'm talking about before I do it.
Very sensible. I'll put that down for me. So we'll get to. You not having stuff, but sadly you can't do things you're not aware of.
On the 1st of March.
On the 1st of March.
Yeah. To speak as well. My apology then for not taking account of that.
Chair, what Alan's referring to, is it in these documents that we've had? Oh, right, you've just done it.
Back to you, Alan.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, there's two tabs in this spreadsheet. The first one is the full list, which members have seen before. That's the one shown on the screen at the moment. I've made some changes to this one, including the local community network number that has been allocated to each town and parish, city, town and parish council. I've left in which districts they were in, and I've also had taken out a couple of other columns. What you see there is every town, city, town and parish council with whether they have adopted the LGA model code of conduct. A substitute councillor was here last time, substituting for you, Chairman, and she suggested that we look at using the local community networks as a way of challenging a significant number of city, town and parish councils who had not adopted the code of conduct, rather than having to go to probably 110, I think it is, individual councils. So that I have now split that down in the second tab. There's 100, yes, there's 100, there's 109 now, because one has now been notified it's been adopted it. There are 109 city, town, parish councils which have yet to adopt or have yet to notify SELC that they have adopted the LGA model. Use those words carefully, because I know Kingston St Mary Parish Council sitting next to me says they've adopted it, but Sam Winter at SELC cannot find the email of confirming that. So I must assume that several others have adopted it and have either told SELC or haven't told SELC, and we don't know where it is. I think I need from members whether we start visiting town and parish councils meetings and saying, what have you done about your code of conduct? Are you looking at it? Are you adopting the LGA one? Or whether we wait for the LCNs to come up. Local community networks, LCNs, are not likely to get going until the end of June, so I'm told. I'm due to have a Teams meeting with the lead officer for LCNs next week to see whether we can use them. My thought was that we only go to them and ask a question in public so that the parish councillors there are aware of the need. If you look, our preference for them to review their code of conduct, if I can put it that way. Happy to take any questions unless anybody's got any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Francis has already got a hand up.
Thanks very much. I don't know whether they must adopt that code of conduct or not, but that's a separate question. That's what we'll cover another time. I fundamentally do not believe LCNs should be used as a forum to beat parish councils up, which is what this is. The LCNs are about priority setting. They will be up and running, but certainly in my part of the world, they are up and running now. But this is about local priority setting. It is not about us telling parish councils what to do. We have here, not only in this room, but we have 110 of us who can each of us talk to our parish councils and discuss this. It doesn't seem to me that there is any great difficulty. I don't think anybody has got any more parishes than I have, which is 23. I'm perfectly happy to talk with them about once I've understood whether they must, may or should, and go from there. But involving LCNs is not an appropriate way of doing things.
Thank you, Francis. Any other questions? David.
Yes, my thought, just based on the experience of Kingston St Mary, that we adopted the new code, I think back in May last year. I think there might be a lot of other councils that are in the same position that maybe just hadn't confirmed with SELC, and so an approach to them directly first of all. The other question was that the paper that was drawn up comparing the different codes and showing sort of reasons for adopting the new code, was that distributed to all parish councils? Both we've got that email address, that sort of distribution address, perhaps a question to the parish councils to say, we're aware that some people might not have notified SELC that it's been updated, but can they clarify whether or not what position they're in? Have they considered it? Are they intending to consider it, or whatever? Might be a starting point as well. But that approach could actually, as Francis says, come through the councillor.
Thank you, David. Scott?
Thank you, Chair. Again, managers to assist Councillor Nicholson in terms of a fundamental question, which was the must, should, one in terms of parish and town councils. Many of the committee know, in terms of legal requirements, parish and town councils, just like this council, are required under the Localism Act to have a code of conduct. The code of conduct we are referring to as a committee, though, is the aspiration of the committee that the code of conduct adopted by the council, which is based on the LGA model code of conduct, be recommended for adoption by the 279 town and parish councils across Somerset. However, I probably emphasise that point about recommended for adoption. This council cannot enforce, oblige or require those parish and town councils to do so. It is their choice on what code to operate. Clearly, we've been trying to encourage, in terms of the benefits for Somerset's communities, of there being a single code of conduct that all councillors, whether you're a parish councillor, a town councillor or a Somerset Council councillor, are bound by the same code. But fundamentally in law, there's no obligation for there to be a single code within a single geography.
Scott, come back to Francis again.
Two points. The first one, which is that actually, isn't it the monitoring officer who needs to know, not SALC? Not everybody's a member of SALC, nor some don't think so. So it's the monitoring officer who would like to have that understanding rather than SALC. And secondly, really good to know that it's a recommendation and an aspiration. Many of councils, certainly in my patch, are regularly update in line with NARC's updates. And there may need to be a Hearts and Minds campaign as to why they should move from that which they see as a national and appropriate thing. And it doesn't seem to me that we should be, certainly we shouldn't be using, even more, we shouldn't be using LCNs on this. I think it's a matter of individual discussion. It's a matter of actually local councillors discussing with their town and parish councils what the advantages and disadvantages might be of moving from what they do now to our preferred model.
Thank you, Francis. Back to Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say to Francis, I hope I wasn't trying to, if you like, bully parish councils into doing this. It was a preference, please. I'm not like that, honestly. I'm not like that at all. It was only a suggestion that we might go to local LCNs simply to ask a public question. Have they looked at their code of conduct? Might they like to?
Yeah.
They should do, I'm not sure.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, perhaps I'll just clarify. We have now got the responsibility under the MO for these 279 or 292, depending which figure that you work on at the moment. And therefore, from a selfish perspective, it's quite important that we have a common code of conduct, even because it's sensible and prudent, etc., because then we're working on one. That's where we're working to. I think personally, if it's like any other form of communication, encouragement, we will need to use as many different tools or processes or conduits, if you like, to reach people. Some will choose to go and talk to their parish councils. I would hope that it would be reinforced in an LCN or wherever other communication medium we use. But the sooner we can get people to adopt a common frame, which I can't see should be an issue, but there may be individual issues, it'll be, the better it will be. And we have been talking to SALC because they have commonly been working with the LGA and with a number of parish councils, and they've been very supportive in getting an idea of what the level, sort of size of the task is to get us to this point. So it wasn't that that's the only direction at all. And I'm sure that, Francis, now that you're chairing that particular P2, you'll be able to make sure that that input comes in.
I'm a little concerned that frankly, the only reason we're doing this is because it's more convenient for us.
Perhaps I didn't make myself clear then. No, that's not the reason, it's because it's prudent.
I think there was a very good document that we just referred to that was distributed to parish councils. Perhaps that should be redistributed among the group for the benefit of those that haven't seen it.
Yes, David, can you just clarify for me which document that is?
There was one that.
Sorry, it's Melanie's comparison document between the LGA, two or three other codes of conduct.
Got
I
you.
can push it round to members now if you like, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. You're going to send it around now, Alan. Thank you. Certainly Francis won't have that, but it'd be worthwhile rejigging that. So sounds like that you shouldn't need to worry too much because it's not a position that has had too much input from members in the past. Sort of betraying any situations here, but the work of Alan has been sort of huge, and I think great because other of us have not been able to give that level of attention. And it would be great now that Francis is on that group with Robin as well. And I would suggest that perhaps an early meeting, both as a briefing and an update, which we don't need to do here, would be useful. And then as part of that meeting to take forward the process we might use to get councils to join a common scheme of affairs. Common code of conduct, I should give it its proper name. But just bear in mind that it isn't just about us. It's about also people understanding what they take on. And we've all sat at meetings, we've all been party to them. In last May, when parish councillors were elected, and they all signed the code of conduct and signed to do various other things, took various bits of piece of paper with them. And I think it's useful because I'm not sure, and I put my hand up to this as well, whether under the terms of agreement, we will tick the box, but whether we actually read it. So I think it's a good point to bring that forward as well. What I'm going to suggest, or I'm going to put up here, is that we need to take this forward. We do need to get an idea of the timescale, but I'll leave you to decide on that when you've seen the nature and the size of the task as well. And I'll leave you with Robin to find a date to do that. Anybody disagree with that as a way forward or want to contribute anything else? I'm just going to say meet to agree the way forward. If I suggest that the 14th again as a date, you'll be giving us an update as you have been doing anyway. Anybody demur from that? You do? Or you agree? Okay, moving on to P3, which is the group that involves, is led by Martin, involves Alan again and Hugh. Perhaps you could update us on the situation with the officer code of conduct.
I think Alan's led on this one. Again,
I'm putting my head above the parapet.
yeah. I don't want to steal his thunder.
Oh, don't
and he's done a terrific job, actually, and I'm very grateful to him.
Martin and I had a meeting with, is it Sarah, head of HR, a few weeks ago, where we went through my comments on it and we agreed some suggested alterations. Sarah was going to put those to, and I know sent an email to Scott, because the document had been approved by full council, but Scott had delegated authority to make minor amendments. And as far as I'm aware, that document's has gone to Scott, and I don't know whether it's been approved, whether those minor changes have been approved under delegated authority. Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to answer that question?
So Nisha, you'll know that certainly back in December last year, we brought the draft Officer Code of Conduct through the committee. That was then subsequently included and adopted by full council on the 22nd of February as part of the constitution. So that is the Officer Code of Conduct. There is a delegation that full council granted to make any minor, more of technical amends. And I am aware that the work of P3 has identified some potential suggested amends, and they're still on the areas of work for me to review to see whether they fall within the scope of that delegation.
Scott, so P3, is that down to move that forward, that discussion? Is it raised?
I mean, if it's helped, certainly by the next meeting, that should certainly be able to report back as to which of those proposed suggestions could fall within the scope and whether any amendments are made to the Officer Code of Conduct. Clearly, if they don't fall within the scope of that delegation, then it would require this committee to formally recommend changes to a full council meeting.
Okay, well, can I ask P3 to look at the scope of the amendments that you want to make with the MO?
As far as I'm aware, Chairman, Scott's already got all those from Sarah. You've got an email from Sarah with the amendments on. As far as I'm aware. So it's, in fact, Chairman, it's for Scott to report back as to what's possible rather than P3.
Okay. Right. So pick into when it fits in the agenda, and we'll then know which of them are within your remit, which are out, and we can have a discussion about whether we want the ones that are out to come in. Is that right? And that'll require full council. So Scott, I mean, it's your workload we're looking at. If you get back to the P3 when, and were you thinking about the next meeting being reasonable, the 14th? Okay. Is that okay with you, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely.
It'd be nice to get some of these things actually bottomed out, but in my experience, they're working documents and they will be subject to continuous improvement as we go along, and that would be only proper. And I think the advantage with this situation that Scott has got certain powers to amend them as we go along. We just need to know where those powers stop and start and how we actually take that forward as a committee. Anything else? Invite Scott to introduce the report. We've done all this, I think. Invite other members, blah, blah, done it. Moving on then, if there are no other comments on item 6 to number 7, annual review of the work of the committee. That was something that I undertook to look at the last year. I circulated, but I certainly wouldn't have circulated to Francis. Apologies again. And basically what I was picking out, I only had responses from the co-opted members, not from the elected members. I did open it to officers should they want to comment, and I could understand that that's a difficult area, but I felt it was up to us to make that offer and for them to respond if they felt. And I've sent that report to you very briefly, and it's, I think I'll proceed by saying, personally, as chair of the committee, I've got to thank everybody who's been involved in this process because it has been extraordinarily difficult. as with most transformations, you've got three positions to be in. The current one, which you're trying to hold and make sure that everybody feels that it's business as normal. The new one that you want to get to, and the transformation that's occurring between the two. Those three positions take quite a lot of time and effort, and I would like to thank everybody that's been involved in that, because frankly, there's been a huge amount achieved in 10 months since May or whatever it is. And that was reflected in the comments that came forward. Unless there are any queries that people have got about that review that I sent round, I will move on. But any queries? It could be positive or negative. President, happy with that and what it said to us. Okay, moving on to item 8, membership of the committee. It became apparent that, in fact, we needed to appoint a deputy chair and also an additional co-opted member for the committee. Just a bit of background to this, that it is part of what we should do anyway. But as we're moving into the situation where we'll be involved in implementing some of these things that we've invented in some cases and moved on, like the code of conduct, it's actually could be quite a demanding time for all of us here. There will be a requirement for hearing panels, so that's why I said in one of my emails, please have a look at this as if you were required to support this, because that's where the challenges may come. And I had a question which I passed on to Andrew. I don't know whether he's had a chance to pick it up, but with the district councils, there may be a backlog coming through there that we need to be aware of just directly. Hopefully that'll even out as a matter of things, but we still have that number of 279 to be aware of, or 292. I'll pick one, 292, nobody's going to argue. So I really just wanted to ask Scott to guide us as about the appointment of deputy chair and also the additional co-opted member, and then an idea of the number of possible complaints which are already in the system, which will come on to the remit of the MO initially, and perhaps involve us in hearing panels. Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I think just taking all those in order in terms of a proposal for the appointment of a vice chair or deputy chair. They're traditionally called vice chairs in terms of committees. That would require a recommendation to full council, certainly as part of the appointments process. Standards Committee is one of the committees that does not currently have, under its terms of reference, the defined appointment of a vice chair. Therefore, for that change to be made, those changes are reserved to full council, as is the appointment of a vice chair. Those are full council appointments. So that would need to be something that the committee would need to take a view upon, make a recommendation, and if the committee agreed that that was something that it wanted to recommend to full council, that would need to go forward to a full council meeting to recommend that the terms of reference in the constitution are amended to reflect that a vice chair also exists, and that full council appoints a member to become that vice chair. So that's a summary of the process for the vice chair. Certainly in terms of, you forgive me, Chair, for your second question, which is around the vacancy for a co-opted member. In effect, that's a requirement upon the monitoring officer to commence and undertake the recruitment. I believe certainly under the terms of reference, there's a prioritisation for, I believe, one of those that co-opted member vacancy to be particularly prioritised towards a serving parish or town councillor, in order to bring the numbers of co-opted members with that category up in representation. So that needs to be a recruitment process that's undertaken. You forgive me, there could be an opportunity in some ways, couldn't there, in the sense of, at the same time as the committee is seeking to improve awareness amongst parish and town councils about the LGA model code, It could take a opportunity to extend people wishing to express an interest to participate and form part of the Standards Committee. I always prefer the carrot approach sometimes, and that may be an opportunity rather than for the two things to come disconnected. So that's in process terms, typically, certainly from start to finish, something like that in previous experience can take something like 3 months at the earliest in order to reach through fruition, through to then interviews, through to making a recommendation back to then appointing, particularly if there's a large amount of interest in that vacancy. The third point, which is then in terms of the current position in terms of complaints matters, we've been completing a review of the, for want of a better phrase, the live or alternative phrase, outstanding complaints yet to be determined of the former 5 councils. From memory, and you'll forgive me, I am working from memory on this, I believe there are approximately 13 of those in existence. Those 13 transfer through to the monitoring officer in order then to take on the completion of those with the assistance of deputy monitoring officers. Some of those could, and I certainly know of one, as will many of the committee, because you will know that we have convened a hearing panel subcommittee in respect of a complaint regarding, I believe, a town councillor rather than a district councillor. I believe that's the case from memory. And in that instance, there is a hearing panel subcommittee, which is perhaps the first time that this council will have convened one. So soon after vesting day, I believe that's scheduled for the 2nd of May. God, my memory's working well today, without looking at a computer. So one of those 13 is triggering what is the highest stage of an investigation, which is a hearing panel subcommittee involving members of this committee, and that's on the 2nd of May. We are reviewing the remaining cases because, of course, depending on the completion of the investigation and the various thresholds with which they are, which they finish at, some of those could also, I'm going to, at this point, you forgive me because I'm talking hypothetically, some of those could similarly, but I would hope not, turn into further hearing panel subcommittees. Generally, it's quite rare for us to have hearing panel subcommittees, certainly in terms of the current adopted procedure which we're operating. It has to be the most serious of breaches or an instance where the subject member effectively continually refuses the findings and the determination and refuses to accept the sanctions. Those are the principal triggers for a hearing panel one. You'll forgive me, but in my experience, those are quite rare in terms of those instances. Even where there's a finding, generally the subject member will accept finding rather than reject it completely and not abide by the sanctions. You'll forgive me partly because I suspect they will know that if they do so, it will trigger a hearing panel, which is more likely to attract public attention. That's a personal observation as to why. But generally, in terms of code of conduct matters, we are fortunate in Somerset in the sense of we are generally do not have a previous level of high numbers of hearing panel instances. I would say that's a fortunate position to be in, particularly when you talk about codes of conduct and behaviour. Other councils are not so fortunate in England.
What, Francis?
I know I'm not available on the 2nd of May, and I'm glad that it's been possible to set that up with other volunteers. It is just a question for now for these 13, and it will fall away in future. But are they being judged on the code of conduct of the time of the alleged offence against the code of conduct, or are they going to be judged against current SCC, not the future, but the current SCC code of conduct? Because that could make life more complicated.
It's generally on their current is the one that they were judged against. So that hearing panel one, as an example, is being judged against the Town Council's Code of Conduct, not against Somerset Council's Model Code one. But clearly, as we move forward, but we will still have this situation, which comes back to the previous discussion, where there are complaints about a Somerset Council councillor, they're in accordance with the Somerset Council's Code of Conduct. Where there are complaints about a town or parish councillor, they are in accordance with the relevant town or parish's Code of Conduct.
Just to be clear, for the moment, if any of those 13 include a district councillor, a former district councillor, possibly now a member of this authority, it would be, if they were in those 13, it would be against their original district. So, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Francis. So to summarise, because we're just going through this process at the moment, there's quite a lot to get the head round. Basically, we could be looking at a code of conduct we've never seen before, which we're having to interpret. We may not have been on a hearing panel before. We will need to be trained. And then thanks to the officers who've been involved, probably particularly Andrew, trying to herd a team together to actually do this, to one find a training time, and Steve's involved with that now as well. And secondly, to find a time for the hearing panel, which takes apparently from 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, which I think seems a long time to me, but justice seems to be needs to be seen to be done as well as to be done. So there's a lot that, in fact, it's quite useful that we're picking off a very difficult one, perhaps to start with, to get one's head round. Process you've got no experience of, sorry, the code of conduct, the process, hearing panel itself. So I just would encourage everybody to think about that sort of state of affairs and come back to the work that P2 is doing, which is to encourage people to adopt one code of conduct, which is fit for all purposes. I think that's all that I was going to cover on that side. So we'll come back to the discussion about Vice Chair, which comes from the members in the room. Do I have a volunteer?
I'm very sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I don't know which of us is going to put our hands up for this. In the current circumstances, I suppose we all find ourselves on more committees than we've been on before, and perhaps in quite considerable positions on those committees. I personally wouldn't feel I could justify the position, but certainly if we're desperate, I'd do it.
Just a bit of background. The Vice Chair obviously takes over from the Chair in situations when the Chair is in New Zealand. Thank you very much for that, Brian. But also in a situation with a hearing panel where the Chair's availability could be a limitation otherwise in terms of how quickly we can see these things done, as well as the members themselves. So, and to answer your first question was, you don't know how many people are going to put their hands up. I haven't got a problem if everybody puts their hands up, and then we'll have to sort out between, obviously not me.
So you'll forgive me, but I mean, ultimately the decision on who to appoint a Vice Chair is full council's. The committee can make a recommendation on, it has a recommendation, it has a view, but ultimately full council will determine whether there should be a Vice Chair and who that Vice Chair is.
I may have another suggestion, which I'm not sure whether it's at all possible, is that is the full council adopting a named person, or can we people move in and out of this position over the course of a year? Yeah.
I apologise, I'm not trying to stitch him up, but Brian actually did do a very good job in your absence last time.
I forgot to mention, we have a rule in my family that anybody who volunteers anybody else automatically volunteers themselves. So I apply that to this meeting as well. Thank you, Martin.
If I may, there's a very easy thing is, yes, of course we should have a Vice Chair. So that part of the recommendations full council, I think, is would be universally accepted.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, there was seriousness in my, I was asking through you if Councillor Smedley would be interested in doing that post.
Thank you. Didn't mean to be glib. Obviously, it's an easy job, as you know, and you're very likely to be here all the time anyway, aren't you? And so therefore I have no hesitation in accepting this pointless recommendation from Councillor Dimmery for us to table over there.
I see a piece of paper coming across the table for me to sign about my availability for as a contract between myself and Brian. Brian, if you would be happy, I'd be certainly feel I'd be honoured to have you there. You've stood in for me before, and that would be the arrangement, really. But if, for example, we had all 13 of these, and I know this is a hypothetical situation, come forward, the potential of getting 3 members plus a chair, vice chair, together for a hearing panel would be quite challenging. And so it might be will be a different situation potentially coming up than it would be when they're coming through. Hopefully, as Scott says, we live in a very benign area where these things aren't common, and that it'll become a rare occurrence because everybody will adhere to the code of conduct, which is the point. I'll take David first, Martin, then come back in.
Sorry, no, I'll just echo Martin's point about what a good job Brian made of chairing the last meeting. I think it was excellent. So I fully support that.
Martin.
Yeah, I do feel that we're a bit vulnerable on the appeals hearing side. I mean, there's only 4 of us. Is it possible to co-opt people onto that? Because we were asked the first time we were asked to attend an appeal. I wasn't able to do that, and given the time that it takes, 10 till 4, I'm not the only one in this situation, but add on another 3 hours for me travelling time, and that makes it more difficult. It's not that I'm unwilling; it just makes it takes more out of my day. Is it possible to co-opt this committee for those circumstances if someone's trained?
I'll pass that through to Scott, but there is a requirement of 3 plus the chair, I think. Is that right? 2 plus the chair. So, with 4 plus the chair, that's quite a challenging number to go to. But do comment on your.
I mean, certainly in terms of the terms of reference for the hearings panel there, it's quite restrictive in the sense of it draws 3 members in total from the Standards Committee. That's, again, principally because of the focus on training. And therefore, there are no substitutes. No substitutes can be used in terms of those. So, yes, I accept the point that that doesn't provide a very narrow pool of people to draw upon for hearing panels. You'll forgive me, but I suppose in terms of, again, our analysis, did we anticipate that would be a problem based on previous evidence of the number of hearing panels? No. But again, that doesn't mean that the future isn't a different place.
David first, then you.
Can I just clarify what we're talking about in terms of members of the Standards Committee? Does that and co-opted members? When I'm just talking about co-opted members, are we talking of our co-opted members on? So Alan and I, could we be called to sit on a hearing committee, or is it just council members? Just council members.
Yeah, keep me correct on this because it's new to me as well, but it's just council members with an additional
Independent person.
That's the word I was looking for. Independent person.
We've got 5. That's 3 independents and 2 reserves.
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting comment. That just picking that up. That there are more of the independent people than there are of the members on this committee, who will require 3 of us if you include a chair and vice chair.
Again, Chair, I know I'm ever repeating myself, but that's because the vast majority of investigation matters are actually dealt with by the monitoring officer in consultation with independent persons. It's quite, out of the total number of complaints, you remember we did a report back in November to the committee on this, there's actually only a very small number that go through to a hearing panel sub reality. So that's why there's a balance in terms of that representation.
Thank you, Scott. But I think it may be something that we need to depend on the size of the issue that we need to review perhaps in the future. Francis.
Yes, exactly. As you said, maybe over the, say, the first year of the existence of this new authority, we should look to see what the demand is and potentially recommend to full council, whoever it is, the appropriate body, that the size of the membership of the committee should be increased of councillors, which would give a bigger pool. But that would be something that we would only want to do if, in the light of experience, in fact, there appear to be a lot more hearings and it becomes a problem. But I don't think we shouldn't, the fact that we've got these 13 now should not, I think, trigger us to do anything dramatic in itself.
Agreed. Okay.
Sorry, can I suggest that if you're thinking about widening the pool somehow, that because the scope now includes parish and town councils, that perhaps you should be including some representatives of town and parish councils at hearing, if they were properly trained.
In terms of the hearing panel.
In terms of the hearing panel, we're saying that, the likelihood of, the frequency of cases that have reached that level so far has been very small comparatively. Do we not envisage that number's could increase, and actually that it's more likely that cases from parish councils are likely to escalate to that level more so than Somerset Council, than county councillors? So, and because you're now judgments are being made about councillors at different levels, that there should be representation at parish council or town council levels, as well as county council levels.
I think it's constitutional issue there, but I'll defer to Scott on that.
I suppose, will you forgive me, Chair, but if anything, perhaps this is something you might want to add into the P1 group. And one of the reasons that paper 5 was added, paper 5 is the hearing committee arrangements. Perhaps this is something that P1 might want to focus on once we've resolved the complaints procedure guidance notes for the new council. Perhaps that's then something that P1 might want to look at in terms of the hearing subcommittee arrangements, in terms of membership and its procedures. And then for the subcommittee, for that priority group, should it feel that there's a need to, from looking at other examples of hearing subcommittees of other councils, should they feel that there are areas to improve, it could then make recommendations back to this committee to consider.
Thank you, Scott. I've got Alan and then Martin. Oh, Francis.
Just that I'm quite sure that the working groups over the last year will have been looking at the numbers of parish council complaints that they have been dealing with, and so we should have I think, already have a good idea of what level of work from parishes and towns and the city should be.
Sorry, Chair. Is there a legal restriction on hearing subcommittees being only members of Somerset Council? Could this committee recommend to full council that it includes co-opted members?
I think what you've just said, Scott, was this would require a change to do that?
Any change that terms of reference would require full council approval, but I think it's a very good question, which is why I suggest that perhaps this is something that is added to P1 to look at the terms of reference, and part of that look at in terms of the membership, and as part of that explore with colleagues in legal services whether there are any restrictions relating to those 3 members solely being drawn from the elected members rather than a mixture of elected members and co-opted members. I mean, that could be an area which P1, working with legal officers, could look at, and subject to the conclusion of that work, make a recommendation back to this committee.
It's a comment as much as a question. Scott might want to come back on it. It's with so few of us as well. Political interest must come into play, I would imagine. If there's a hearing and we are asked to, we can't possibly judge somebody probably in our own political group. Would have thought, could we?
There is nothing barring under the terms of reference. The 3 members are drawn from the elected membership. It has no relationship with who the subject member is in terms of their political party. They're just solely drawn from the what would be the 5 elected members in this instance.
You want to come back?
Just to come back, but presumably if we felt we were compromised in some way, it may not be politically, but we would have to withdraw from that process.
I mean, like everything, it's open to every member to individually determine whether they have either a personal, prejudicial, or a conflict of interest in a matter that's proposed, and if that would mean effectively withdrawing themselves from being nominated to appear on such a subcommittee, then yes, that's a choice that's open to an individual member.
Go Brian, and then Hugh.
People can exempt themselves, obviously, just as you said, by withdrawing and avoid that problem. This is not a politically balanced committee anyway. It's not possible to add any more. That's another party turns up at a by-election. You're not going to get an additional political member. So I'd say, why don't we go along with Alan's proposal and put it through to the P1 group to come up with that recommendation.
Hugh, sorry, have I been missing you a few times?
But 5 times.
Oh, I do apologise. Hugh.
Yeah.
Please don't take the biscuits away.
Chair, I've done this job, and I think I wanted to ask you was the coming trial that we've got. I used the word trial perhaps a bit over the top, but the hearing that we've got coming up at Bridgewater, is it because it's from Bridgewater the person is? Because normally you would come to a central place. So in my colleague's place here at Frome, couldn't we go closer to him if there's one comes up saying Yeovil or something like that to help his travel arrangements? Because if we're going to Bridgewater, why aren't we holding it here?
Again, it's only in terms of the approach to holding meetings at the council. The current approach is based upon making use of the 5 available principal offices around Somerset, and to use and hold the meeting depending on the business. So clearly where we have a matter that relates to a local geography and it's the only matter in question, then it would be sensible where we have meeting officers to hold the meeting there if that's practicable. So taking Councillor Davies' point, so does that mean if there was a hearing panel relating to a matter for a member hypothetically in Frome, then could we hold the meeting at the Shepton Mallet offices? Yes, we could, and that would be the intention in terms of an approach. So it's certainly not intended that all meetings are held in Taunton. The only reason that we convene, I suppose, some of the principal committees is because the business that generally comes to those principal committees can come from all the various parts of the geography, and Taunton's quite central. That's one of the main reasons. Where we have single item agendas or items relating to specific geographies, yes, we will use those local offices for those meetings.
Brian, very kindly to be nominated. Do you take that process on and put that work out, Scott? First chair.
Sorry, Joe, if you're saying that the committee has resolved that it would like to recommend to full council the change the term of reference of the committee to include the appointment of a vice chair, and for full council to appoint a vice chair from the elected members. I mean, I know there's, you forgive me, I know there was quite a bit of a discussion. I'm not sure whether there was an affirmative vote and as in a proposer and a seconder that said, yes, that is exactly what the committee wants to do.
Sorry.
Should be answered for you.
But Mr. Chair, if Brian's willing, I will propose Councillor Smedley and welcome a seconder.
Sorry, I'll sit down. I'm gonna hear the microphone. So Scott's question is, are we agreeing that we should have a vice chair? Yeah. So, yes. And we have,
We always did have a vice chair. Back in 2017, I was a vice chair with Goat, was it Goat from Glastonbury? Yeah.
well,
We previously had them, yes.
surprised you didn't have your hand up for the position. An agreement, proposal and a seconder that we will have a vice chair. We've got a recommendation that it's Brian. The question is, how do we take that forward?
On that basis, Chair, that will become effectively a recommendation from the Standards Committee to the annual general meeting on the 24th of May.
He's got just one other comment on the co-opted situation. Then is it possible to have a job spec circulate if we are going to think about others that might be interested, according to what Scott said, circulated, and as we're talking to people, we'll have an idea. The first question will be, well, what's it involve? And I think we all need to be on the same piece of paper with that one. But Hugh's got a question.
Chair, there's a danger here. The people that would come on, people like us here, these committee meetings, are very educated people. And they'd be more than likely a certain colour. And we've got a problem on our hands. That's why it was all split, that there was 5 different people, 5 different organisations. You had the UKIP before, etc. And that is a danger if you're going to have several people coming on here who are of one making, and an issue comes up about one of their friends, you know, they're going to help them put their hands up the other way. I don't care what rules we say, what you must declare, it can happen, and you mustn't let that happen. So I would suggest, if you're going to put out a letter to people to perhaps put for the job, is seek which way they vote. You know, what are they? You will have seriously minded people standing for this.
Again, just hopefully just for helpful reassurance, I believe what the chair's asking is again in terms of whether we have a summary job role specification for a co-opted member of the Standards Committee in order to help support the recruitment exercise in effect, so that when we go out to the 279 town and parish councils, and when quite understandably individuals say, I'd be really interested in putting my name forward for that, we're able to explain this is what we expect to be the role of that individual. To go back to, I believe, Councillor Davies' point, which is partly referring in part around potentially around voting. Again, just to clarify, co-opted members do not have voting rights on the Standards Committee, just for clarification.
Thank you, Scott. Does that answer your question?
Excuse me, Chair, I'm sorry, I disagree with you, sir. We're talking about the committees when we're interviewing somebody for doing wrong. they're going to be coming on that committee. They will be voted, saying guilty or not guilty.
I think that at the moment, there's no co-opted people on the committees. One of the questions was, do we need to, well, the P1's going to do is consider that as to whether that would increase the numbers, the pool that we have to pick from, without increasing the political aspect of the members who are here in this room today. So it's that balance. Nothing decided at the moment to you. I think first, and then perhaps we'll just top and tail this.
Chairman, I'm bewildered by Hugh's comments there. Where I place my cross on the ballot paper has nothing whatsoever to do with what I say in this room at these committee meetings. I'm sorry, Hugh. I think I speak for David as well. We do not, as co-opted members, bring any political party into this room and wouldn't do to any hearing committee. I personally would judge a hearing, a complaint on the facts in front of me. Sorry, Hugh. I hope you will take that the way it's meant.
Scott, have you got anything you want to add to that?
Again, Chair, I think you've covered all the key points that Councillor Davies raised. The principal one being that, again, for assurance, the current membership of a hearing panel subcommittee is based on 3 members drawn from the 5 elected members of the committee. There is a piece of work that I believe the committee has commissioned, which is to ask the P1 group to look at those terms of reference and see whether there is the potential for those 3 members to also include some of the co-opted members of the committee. But that's a piece of work to be reviewed, to then come back to this committee. Until that piece of work has been completed, the current position stands, which is only elected members of the committee can make up the membership of a hearing panel. The related matter in part was, we know that of the 5 co-opted members that should be on the committee, we only have 4. Therefore, we have a vacancy that we need to fill. And now it's clearly opportune, now that we have the new council, to go out to the 279 town and parish councils in order to attract one of their members to step forward to take up that vacancy, because the committee has previously flagged, and it's covered in the constitution, that a number of the co-opted members should be drawn from the parish and town council membership, and that vacancy in particular is targeted towards facilitating that objective.
Is that okay, Hugh? I think all that I was thinking we were doing was being part of the recruitment process, really. But they will still have to go through a selection process anyway. So that's it's just really making sure we've, rather than 0 people coming forward, we've got perhaps 102 or something, 10 perhaps. Okay. Brian's been recommended, and that's, I guess, for Scott, for you to take forward.
Yes, Chair.
And then we've got the size of the hearing panel, which P1 are to review. Ongoing in the light of experience as well as
Size of this committee.
membership. Okay, thank you. And then the co-opted +1 job spec to the standards committee. Okay. Right, I think that covers all the items on the agenda, and that's the action plan. I just want to make one comment, really, that because a number of people have said they found it difficult to make the meeting programme that's coming forward and asked me to put this forward. I'll just apologise, but I'm sure without knowing in detail the difficulty of creating the timetable and amongst everything else that officers have had, it has been quite difficult. I think Paul's not able to make the next one or this one. So the flexibility is limited, really, with finding a space for us all to meet in. and a time that fits with everybody. And as we've already talked about, we've got a limited number, so that, you know, it's quite difficult. I would just ask you perhaps to look at your diaries. If you've got, you should have all the details and dates for the next year. And just come back if there are any issues about that, so that if we have got an issue about quorum, Cora, whatever, then we can pick that up as early as possible, I think. Is that a fair view of the situation? But apologies that it was a sort of a restricted take it or leave it, or appeared to be that. I know some have raised that point. Okay. 12. So that covers all the points on the agenda. I'm going to formally close the meeting and perhaps have a conversation, Francis, although I've got to see David as well, isn't it? David and Steve. Francis, if we don't manage to do it today, I'll give you a call.